all these wars. Iraq was a complete fiasco. Vietnam, a complete fiasco. And here we're getting involved in Syria. And we're losing our good men. We've got to stop going to war for other people. That's what America First. I support it. I understand why people don't like what's happening, but we can't continue to lose our men.
Ruth, thank you for the call. Thank you. We'll get a response.
Listen, Ruth, you're absolutely right. There are plenty of people, and I disagreed with my former friend who passed away, Senator McCain, who wanted tens of thousands of troops in Syria. Now, I believe that our most important goal is to protect the American people. Unfortunately, in this age of terrorism, we cannot let ISIS and al-Qaeda regroup, for example, in Yemen or in Syria. They're plotting and planning, okay, continue to instigate and incite attacks in the United States. Now, fortunately, those attacks have been far and few between. And to the credit of President Obama and President Trump, there hasn't been a 9/11 style attack in the United States. But in order to prevent these terrorist organizations from being able to regroup and to plot these attacks, unfortunately, we have got to have special forces operations tracking down their operations and trying to prevent them from regrouping. That's the price, unfortunately, that we have to pay as Americans to keep our country safe.
And clearly there's a division within the Republican Party. I want to share with you in a moment what Senator Lindsey Graham told reporters yesterday. But first, the president, in response to that criticism, again, Lindsey Graham, one of the president's closest allies on Capitol Hill, saying, quote, "So hard to believe that Lindsey Graham would be against saving soldiers' lives and billions of dollars. Why are we fighting for our enemy, Syria, by staying and killing ISIS for them? Russia, Iran, and other locals, question mark. Time to focus on our country and bring our youth back home where they belong." Here's more with Senator Graham.
As to the decision by the president, I don't know where it came from, but it needs to be reconsidered. Ambassador Jeffries, our special envoy to Syria, a good man who was an ambassador in Iraq, just 2 days ago announced a commitment to stay until we got this right. I don't know how this decision was made. It literally came out of left field. It has rattled the world. You see North Korea flexing their muscle now about, well, why don't you leave South Korea before we do a deal? I can promise you that everything that happened in Iraq is going to happen in Syria unless we change course. And I can promise the president, if you will reevaluate this decision, you'll have a lot of support across both sides of the aisle.
Ambassador Ginsburg.
Isn't it horrible that the president appoints a special envoy for stabilization and to help us in Syria, Jim Jeffries, a great former diplomat who was appointed by Secretary Pompeo. And 3 days ago, I was at a lunch where, in effect, Jim Jeffries said, we are going to stay in Syria till we finish the job against ISIS. And it may be, several more months, but he didn't put a timetable on. And the next morning, the very next morning, he wakes up, reads the paper, and hears the president determined unilaterally, arbitrarily, that we're going to withdraw troops. Can you imagine how our top diplomats feel when they're undercut by their own commander-in-chief?
So there was no consultation between the president and Ambassador Jeffries?
Absolutely zero. And that, to me, I would hate to be a diplomat in this administration under those circumstances.
And what role do you think General Mattis had in the conversations?
Well, we know that in the end, the president had Mattis in there as well as Pompeo, but he didn't have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in that meeting when he announced that decision. Can you imagine that? The president would not have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in the meeting to determine the fate of American troops in Syria.
What is the president's foreign policy? How would you define it?
Well, he calls it America First. I mean, that's his bring America's troops home, stop engaging abroad. It's an isolationist foreign policy. It's something that goes back to the 30s. Look, the American people, he's playing off of a very small base of American people who believe that America's role in the world has been detrimental to American interest at home. There are many of us who would argue to the contrary. We wouldn't have the economy that we had if America didn't stand up for the values and trade systems that are important for us, and to stand up to countries like China and Russia that are determined to undermine our allies abroad. Without our Canadian and European allies and our allies in the Middle East, I'm talking about Israel, how are we supposed to be able to have the benefit of a great economy if in the end all we're doing is essentially looking inward and instead of protecting our interest abroad.
So based on who you talked to, among our closest allies, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, French President Macron, in a private moment, how do they view this president?
Well, I read the papers like you do, and all they do is basically wring their hands. They keep hoping that in the end they can humor him, they can keep him under control. I mean, President Macron of France tried to embrace him and invite him to a Bastille Day military parade that seemed to impress the president. He's had very poor relations with our closest ally, Canada. I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau, how can the American people accept the fact that we have a president of the United States that insults our Canadian allies? I mean, I was in Canada just several weeks ago. The Canadians were beside themselves about how Trump is treating them. That's unacceptable. Americans should resent the fact. I mean, it's one thing that the American people could say, well, you know, the president's just being the president. Look, the Canadians are our #1 trading ally in the world, and all he's doing is insulting the role that they're playing in our security and in our trade relations.
Next, for Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, Deb in Houston, Texas. You oppose this move by the president. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Would you please ask your guest, I'd like to know, we've been building up to this since Trump took in this unilateralism where he just tweets out whatever and it just happens and it's chaotic. I'm concerned that this paves the way for him to privatize the war and bring in Eric Prince the way that the American people rejected that and take away any transparency that we have. And this is just one aspect of the unilateralism that we're getting, all this from the MAGA to the Make America and the Wall and isolation. It's like if you grow up playing Battleship or Risk, it's little pieces and you don't just walk over and shove the board away and throw it in the closet. You have to build it up and take it down. And I'm concerned that the American people that call in and say, oh, shut the government down, do this war or that, there are people's lives here. There are connections. There are our place in the world, and I really want to know about this privatization because Trump seems to want to he's merging the Republican Party into Trump Party, and he seems to be just privatizing everything, and he's a privateer. So I'd like to hear the answer to that, and thank you for the opportunity.
Deb, thank you.
Well, there's plenty of people in Washington, what essentially has become the swamp of Washington, that are marching into this White House and saying, you know what, for a couple of $1 billion, I can put 10,000 former SEALs and Navy troops and military on the ground in Afghanistan. This is this guy, Prince, that you're talking about. I can tell you that there's at least 5 or 6 stories, Steve, that I have heard of people who have been major donors to the Trump campaign, who have marched into the White House and said, you know what, I think we can help you put together a private army. It'll only cost the United States and our allies a couple of $1 billion. Of course, the person who's putting this together is probably looking for a nice payday. Putting American troops on the ground in a private army who are not under the control of the U.S. military, much less even doing that in the first place, in my judgment, opens up a whole can of worms.
Let's go to Nancy in Austin, Texas. Good morning. You support this move. Why?
I do. First of all, Lindsey Graham never saw a war he didn't want to wage, so everyone should know that he was going to be against this. Secondly, this gentleman, if people should go look on his website, because what we're hearing from him is the globalist viewpoint, which is fine, but he should announce that from the very beginning. You should actually have somebody like Rand Paul on for the counter side, who very much supports Senator Rand Paul, Trump pulling our troops out of there. Our troops are in 130 countries plus around the world. We are been fighting this, building this empire for a long time. We're broke. Let's look and see what this has gotten us. Remember, we don't talk about it much in the media anymore, but Libya? Now, how did that work out? Because we basically helped to facilitate the killing of the leader there. And now, who owns it? ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, that was quite a little thing we pulled off there. And so we want to do the same thing in Syria, overthrow Assad. Now, let's keep in mind that the Christians from Iraq, when we went in there and did our little ditty in there, moved to Syria so they could live under Assad. Assad let them live peacefully.
Nancy, thank you for the call. By the way, we have an open invitation for Senator Rand Paul to join us on the program and take calls anytime. We always welcome members of the House and the Senate to be with us. And this is a tweet, we should point out, from Senator Paul yesterday, who did support what the president was doing in Syria. I'm happy to see a president who can declare victory and bring our troops out of a war. It's been a long time since that happened.
Mission accomplished, right? Well, let me try to push back on this. Right now, you know, for all the politics that everyone is engaged in about the Syria withdrawal, here's the situation on the ground. There are 20 to 30,000 ISIS fighters that are still lurking around Iraq and Syria. In the area that the United States and our allies have still been unable to conquer in the former caliphate, there are 3,000 die-hard ISIS fighters, many of whom are the command and control operatives of ISIS. They have been we have been unable so far to get them out of this pocket in the Euphrates River Valley. Many of those folks who are still part of ISIS and still that we have not been able to beat are plotting and planning attacks against U.S. forces and in Europe, for example, inciting and inspiring. So the fact of the matter is that when you look at the sheer situation on the ground, we have made enormous progress, but the job is not done. And for the president to declare mission accomplished, well, you know what? It's an alternative universe, alternative facts. The facts on the ground, putting aside Assad, there's no way that 2,000 troops on the ground are going to get rid of Assad, which is why I disagree with my good friend Lindsey Graham about our role in Syria. We only have one job in Syria, Steve, and that is to make sure that the caliphate is completely destroyed. The American people need to know that the president is prematurely withdrawing from Syria before the job is done.
And the BBC publishing this official response from the British government. It's available on the BBC website. Quote, the global coalition against Daesh has made huge progress, but much remains to be done, and we must not lose sight of the threat that they pose. The British government remains committed to the global coalition and the campaign to deny Daesh territory and ensure its enduring defeat, working alongside our critical regional partners in Syria and beyond. So what about the Kurds?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons why General Mattis resigned. The American people need to understand that 2,000 troops in Syria were special forces as well as Air Force advisors to help call in airstrikes, largely as a result of the ground offensives that were being waged by our allies, the Syrian Kurds. Look, the American people need to understand the Kurds have been a people without a country for decades and decades. The majority of them live in Turkey. The Turks want to prevent them from ever organizing and creating their own state. They live in Syria, they live in Iraq, they live in Iran, and the Syrian Kurds had become, in effect, enlisted by the U.S. military to be the ground troops to fight against ISIS. Once we pull back and withdraw our troops, the Turks have threatened to launch an offensive to kill the very people on the ground that protected American troops and fought the fight against ISIS. So I asked the American people, how do they feel, Steve, about betraying our allies who did most of the fighting for us against ISIS?
This is the headline from the Washington Post. The Syria pullout alarms allies in Iraq and heartens foes. Coleman is joining us. Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you for waiting. Good morning.
Yes. One, thank God for President Trump preventing us from heading down the path of Venezuela. The guest on your program praising the socialists like Macron and Trudeau, I bet he did not have the same objection whenever Obama pulled the troops out of Iraq. But basically, Trump is saving us as a nation from the deep state that's now being uncovered of what we would have had if Hillary and people like your guest continued in control.
We'll get a response. Thank you, Coleman.
Well, listen, I'm very proud of the position that I take as an American who has spent my career fighting for our country and involved in our country abroad as a diplomat and in the intelligence area. The fact of the matter is that, look, I understand the wariness of people like yourself who feel that the president is doing what is essential. Whether you want to put labels on our allies, that's your prerogative. I think that President Macron, as well as Prime Minister Trudeau, represent two of the greatest allies that the American people could ever have. the situation in Venezuela is totally out of control. And the president himself said, well, maybe we'll militarily intervene in Venezuela. Well, why don't you smoke on that one, because it was the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who suggested to militarily intervene in Venezuela.
This editorial from the New York Times. Jim Mattis was right, asking who now will protect America. Part of the editorial reads as follows. No one wants American troops deployed in a war zone longer than necessary, but there is no indication that Mr. Trump has thought through the consequences of a precipitous withdrawal, including allowing ISIS forces to regroup and create another crisis that would draw the United States back into the region. An American withdrawal, writes the New York Times editorial board, would also be a gift to Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader who has been working hard to supplant American influence in the region and who on Thursday enthusiastically welcomed the decision by saying, quote, Donald's right.
Here's my reaction to all of that, Steve. The president has had more than ample opportunity to leverage the art of the deal, for example, with the Saudis, particularly after the Khashoggi murder. Why did he not say to the Saudis, it's not our fight against ISIS. You need to put troops on the ground as we withdraw. It is the responsibility of our Arab allies to fight the fight against ISIS, not primarily American forces. We will support you, but you need to put boots on the ground. I've always argued for decades on this issue that the most important thing that we have failed to do is to get the Arabs to fight the fight that we shouldn't be fighting. The Saudis, I've consistently said, will always fight to the last American. Where are their troops? Where are the troops that are most worried about ISIS fighting the fight that they should fight? And which is why I believe the president lost a major opportunity in this Saudi crisis to have said to the king of Saudi Arabia, you want to get out of the jail guard for Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, then you need to put a division on the ground in Syria to fight the fight against ISIS. And he didn't do that. And this man doesn't know the art of the deal when it comes to diplomacy and foreign policy. And
this headline again from Reuters, not only Syria, but also the withdrawal of as many as 5,000 troops from Afghanistan. Jay is joining us from Fenton, Michigan. Good morning.
Good morning. First off, I want to say my son is a Green Beret right now, and I think he's probably in Afghanistan. I'm not sure. They don't really tell me. But after listening to Lindsey Graham say what he said about he doesn't understand why Trump is doing these type of things, I've kind of got a cynical idea about it. It's Trump is doing all this to distract from his legal problems and his treason, and that's what he's become. Is he's a treasonous president to the people of this country. It drives me nuts. Ignorance is not a virtue. Trump is incompetent, and he thinks he's an emperor. I think he's demented. I think there's something wrong with him. If it isn't just due to his criminal ideas about how to run an organization, it has to be dementia. So he's either a criminal or he's crazy. So have a good day.
Jay, thank you for that call and that comment. I'm going to go back to another issue, though, because there have been reports on a number of fronts that the president had been in touch with Turkish President Erdogan before announcing his decision on Syria. Explain the significance of that.
Here's the backstory on that, Steve. President Erdogan has instructed Turkish troops to launch an offensive in northeast Syria to take on the Syrian Kurdish forces that have been supporting American troops and stabilizing that area against ISIS. He is determined on behalf of his country to, in effect, eradicate these Syrian Kurdish forces that have been supported and trained by the United States. He has threatened over the last several years to launch these offensives, and indeed, we almost got to the point where U.S. military was going to have to fight Turkish forces, our NATO ally, in order to defend the Syrian Kurds that are fighting the United States battle against ISIS. Probably what happened on this phone call is Erdogan said to the president, I'm going to move no matter what against the Syrian Kurds, and if American troops get harmed, so be it. And the president said, well, maybe this is the time now to fulfill my commitment to get American troops out of Syria. So the president blinked. That's exactly what I think happened.
Let's go to Terry joining us from Rogers, Minnesota. Good morning.
Good morning. Mark, you're a funny guy. 2 years Trump's had, and that's plenty of time to solve the problem. People of your ilk and your thought process have had 20 years, lost trillions of dollars in money, lost U.S. soldiers' lives. And yet, where does it end? Where are you concerned about? Diplomats and the French and the Canadians, how they feel. Well, you know what? They can, if they feel like that, they can increase their debt. Step all the way in. I feel there's no reason after 20 years for people with your thought process who are supposed to be so smart, but yet have failed to end any of the wars or solve any of the problems. So I think that maybe you should step back and look and say, maybe my way of thinking has been a complete failure, and I should move on. Thank you.
Thank you for the call.
Well, that's your opinion. I don't necessarily agree with it. You tend to think that perhaps the United States is the only country that has ever been engaged in an effort to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Do you think the Canadians have not fought on our behalf? Do you think the French have not fought on our behalf? Do you think they would have joined forces with us if we had a president that was determined to insult them and to, in effect, denigrate their contribution? Do you think that in the end NATO would have played the role that it played had it not been for the leadership of good presidents, whether it be Obama or Bush or even President Clinton? So listen, you can't have it both ways. You can't have the United States safe and protected and not have allies supporting us. But if you think that in the end the United States can just willy-nilly return home and turn its back and pretend that World War I, World War II didn't happen and that we all got to go wrong, well, the fact of the matter is that, say the same thing about North Korea. Well, then, based on your reasoning, we should just pull our troops out of South Korea and let Kim Jong-un have his way. The president declared that victory in North Korea. He said that North Korea is going to denuclearize. There isn't one intelligence agency in the United States, not one person who is familiar with North Korea, that would agree that the president was correct, and indeed, once again, an empty boast on the part of Donald Trump when it comes to a conflict that he has been unable to resolve. And
this is from Michael. Good to have Mark to provide news on what's going to happen in Syria going forward. The mainstream media hasn't had a word on that of what he just put out.
Contra a revista Charlie Hebdo, que, tal como afirmamos, foi no norte da cidade francesa de Paris. E agora, continuando, vamos a mais uma reportagem de vídeo. Neste final do ano, os americanos especializados em África analisam a transição pacífica do poder no continente africano e consideram os casos da Etiópia, Libéria, Serra Leoa e Mali como encorajadores, mas recordam que, em alguns países, há presidentes que parecem vitalícios. Na Etiópia foi registrada uma mudança política sem precedentes em 2018, diz Robin Brigitte, ex-embaixador dos Estados Unidos na União Africana.
A decisão histórica do ex-primeiro-ministro Haile Mariam de abandonar voluntariamente o poder é algo que nunca aconteceu na história da Etiópia e abriu caminho para a entrada do atual primeiro-ministro Abiy Ahmed, que fez uma série de importantes reformas políticas, desde a libertação de presos políticos ao esforço para a nomeação da primeira mulher presidente na história da Etiópia.
O segundo país mais populoso de África alcançou igualmente a paz com a vizinha Eritreia depois de 20 anos de hostilidades. Mais perto de 1 milhão de pessoas viviam no refúgio no sul da Etiópia desde a erupção em abril de um conflito, segundo agências das Nações Unidas. No Zimbábue, a renúncia forçada do presidente Robert Gabriel Mugabe no final de 2017 preparou o caminho para as eleições deste ano. Keno Paulo, professor assistente de política africana na Universidade de Georgetown.
Não foi democrática, mas foi transição. Qualquer transição é melhor do que nenhuma, especialmente quando é feita constitucionalmente, tendo o partido ZANU-PF feito algumas manobras para parecer que foi uma transição democrática.
As eleições foram ganhas pelo presidente Emerson Mnangagwa, um aliado de longa data de Robert Mugabe.
Eu acho que, tal como estamos a ver em Moçambique e Angola, qualquer transição é boa, porque o novo grupo de governantes normalmente quer o seu próprio homem, de modo a implementar as reformas que se vê, por exemplo, em Angola, que não pode ser do agrado do regime anterior.
Já no final deste ano, a atenção vai para a República Democrática de Congo, que terá eleições a 23 de dezembro. Michael Ohanle, da Brookings Institution, aqui em Washington.
Se isso correr bem, acho que será um enorme avanço, porque poderia ser combinado às tendências não mais da Nigéria, Quênia e Tanzânia.
Embora as tendências para a democracia sejam encorajadoras, a África ainda tem presidentes há décadas no poder. São os casos dos presidentes do Congo-Brazzaville, Camarões, Uganda, Sudão ou Guiné Equatorial, e neste caso, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo.
E temos uma atualização do caso do tiroteio em Viena. Pelo menos uma pessoa morreu e outra ficou ferida num tiroteio num restaurante no centro de Viena ao início da tarde desta sexta-feira. De acordo com informações da polícia local na rede social Twitter, o atirador ainda não foi detido e desconhecem-se até o momento as motivações do incidente. A área está a ser observada por um helicóptero e as imediações do restaurante Lugek estão interditadas à população, já que há aquele perímetro de segurança que é praxe das autoridades.
E continuando com as notícias, vamos não muito longe de Viena, vamos ao Vaticano, onde o Papa Francisco exortou nesta sexta-feira aos padres que abusaram sexualmente de menores de idade a se entregarem, no que é uma das afirmações mais contundentes do líder da Igreja Católica sobre a crise que assola aquela igreja. Aqueles que abusam de menores, eu diria isto, convertam-se e se entregam à justiça humana e se preparem para a justiça divina, disse Francisco na sua mensagem de Natal tradicional no Vaticano. Embora não tenha ficado claro de imediato, segundo reporta a Reuters, o Papa se referia ao sistema judicial da Igreja ou à justiça civil, ou ambas. Fontes do Vaticano acreditam que foi a primeira vez que o Papa fez um apelo tão direto. Francisco, que já usou a sua mensagem de Natal para denunciar casos de corrupção e má administração no Vaticano, desta vez se concentrou na crise global de abusos sexuais envolvendo padres católicos. E ele disse que fique claro que diante destas abominações, a Igreja não poupará esforços para fazer todo o necessário para levar à justiça todo aquele que tiver cometido tais crimes. A Igreja jamais tentará silenciar ou não encarar seriamente nenhum caso, afirmou o Papa Francisco. Ele reconheceu que a Igreja cometeu erros graves no passado, mas prometeu fazer dos erros passados oportunidades para eliminar este flagelo tanto da instituição quanto da sociedade no geral.
E a gente tem sempre o Espaço do Ouvinte, que é apresentado pela nossa colega Dani Steski, sempre uma entrevista especial com um ouvinte ou internauta da Voz da América. Mas nós vamos também falar de coisa boa, como falamos durante todo o programa. Agora é a época do Natal. E na Espanha, uma corrida muito especial com Papai Noel, ou o Pai Natal. Como ele é conhecido pelas suas entregas de presentes, ele também é sinônimo de solidariedade, esperança e caridade. E neste ano, milhares de Pai Natal correram nas ruas da Espanha para arrecadar fundos para os tratamentos de crianças com cancro.
O Pai Natal é conhecido pelas suas entregas de presentes, mas ele é também sinónimo de esperança e solidariedade. Em Espanha, milhares de Pai Natal participaram numa corrida para arrecadar fundos para o tratamento de crianças com cancro. O nosso colega Arash Arabassadi tem a reportagem. Milhares de pessoas vestidas como o Pai Natal correram nas ruas de Madrid para arrecadar dinheiro para crianças com cancro. Vestindo casacos vermelhos e chapéus, participantes correram cerca de 5 km, no que os organizadores chamaram de o maior grupo de Pai Natal de corredores.
Estamos aqui por uma causa de caridade e para celebrar a época do Natal.
Parte das doações irá para a Inteos, uma organização não governamental para pesquisa e educação com parceria com a Start Madrid, cuja missão é acelerar o desenvolvimento de remédios de combate ao cancro.
Está um dia bonito e estamos a aproveitar para fazer desporto e por uma causa bonita, para crianças.
É isso mesmo, caridade e solidariedade nesse Natal para todos nós, amados Miguel.
Feliz Natal para ti, Feliz Natal para todos os nossos amigos, festas felizes, feliz 2019, mas para isso ainda temos tempo.
Sim, até para a semana, para os nossos colegas, eu volto daqui a 2 semanas.
Boas férias.
Obrigada.
Um grande abraço, até para a semana.